Though he was clearly the son of a noble duke, the boy had been ridiculed since birth. He was a young lord with a miserable fate. From the moment he was born, he bore the stigma of having caused his own mother's death. Later, he would grow into the villain who destroyed the empire. He was the male lead of the Flower of Darkness. That was the fate carried by the child, now weeping bitterly in his room. The ducal house of Ambrosia had, for generations, been unable to escape the cursed dark power. Yet in the distant future, Claude, swallowed by the dark power, would be saved by the female lead, Elena Preston. But before that, after finally losing his mind, he killed his own father with his own hands. To prevent that tragedy from happening, Sarah volunteered to become Claude's wet nurse. As soon as she arrived at the ducal estate, she found the surrounding maids all casting pleading looks at her. Only one maid wore a mocking smile. The moment she spoke, she questioned Countess Sarah's identity, because in the Empire, unmarried women were not qualified to inherit titles. Sarah merely smiled faintly. Her status as countess had been personally acknowledged by the emperor. She had not expected a maid of House Ambrosia to be ignorant of even that. Toward this maid, Sarah showed not the slightest kindness. The other party was someone who bullied the weak and feared the strong. To secure her position beside the young master, she constantly provoked Claude with words, even driving him to kill. Sarah quietly walked up to the maid and said, "Please address me respectfully as countess." Immediately afterward, the maid blurted it out uncontrollably. When Sarah came to Claude's door, however, he refused to let her in for a long time. Sarah did not mind. She had a duty to heal the wounds in Claude's heart. Since Claude was resisting her, she could only force her way into the room. As power gathered continuously in Sarah's palm, an overwhelming force instantly blasted the door open. Only then was Sarah's identity as a mage made public, and that maid finally understood that Countess Sarah's title was not, as she had imagined, obtained through unreasonable demands. On the contrary, it was very likely that the emperor had lowered himself to ask for her help. Across the entire magic continent, mages were extremely rare. Any mage who went to any country would receive treatment comparable to royalty. Yet such a noble existence had insisted on coming to the ducal estate to serve as the young master's tutor. Everyone present burst into an uproar. Sarah's gaze, however, remained fixed on Claude. Not only was the child very adorable, he also looked a great deal like her dear friend Tylen. In truth, besides being a mage, she also had a secret that could never, under any circumstances, be known to the world. One day, she discovered that she could no longer wake up in her body in that other world. Because she had been born with astonishingly powerful magic, her magic was so strong that her soul might collapse at any time. Thus, by instinct, she split her soul in two and lived different lives in two separate dimensions. Living for a very long time in one world was only a single day in the other. Unlike Sarah, who could control powerful magic, after she became Park Hyun, all she could do was foresee the future. Before she grasped the world where Sarah Millen lived and foresaw that world's future, her modern life had been very ordinary. Yet in the present world, Park Hyun's body was involved in a traffic accident. Even so, she could still clearly sense that the two souls were connected by an unbroken, hair-thin thread. At that moment, the Duchess suddenly came. She took Sarah's hand and said she had made an important decision and needed Sarah, her important friend, to support her. She wanted to search for Hugo after giving birth, even if that meant abandoning both Issen and Hugo's child. And Issen was willing to help her hide everything by disguising her child as his own. As long as news of her death spread, her father would have no choice. Then she would be free. The female lead's best friend had gradually fallen into madness after marrying the elder brother of the man she loved. She hoped the female lead would care for her child. The female lead thought that all of this had been caused by her, because after despairing over the future she had foreseen, she had written a novel for her own satisfaction, causing Tylen's life to become like this. She wondered whether Tylen would still be willing to forgive her. A man who once bore all the despair in the world was ultimately redeemed by the happiest woman in the world. Even in extreme despair, people did not borrow another's power, but relied only on ordinary love and trust. They wisely saved a world that had been collapsing mercilessly amid chaos. Before her was the female lead's friend, Tylen, and the female lead was telling her a story she had written. Tylen was very excited. She had not expected the female lead to write novels. It was truly amazing, but Tylen would never know what exactly she had seen. Although she had witnessed it with her own eyes through Park Hye-yen's foresight, she still could not believe what a cruel future this picturesque empire would eventually face. Not only that, she also saw in her foresight that, like the other reclusive mages, she too would take her disciples and choose to hide her strength, coldly watching the empire fall into chaos. She also discovered that, in the future, there was a reason she abandoned the empire. If she did not know the cause behind it, it would be difficult to change her own choice. This novel was something she had written to comfort herself after witnessing that shocking future. She always felt that everything happening in this world was nothing more than a fabricated story. Speaking of the novel, Thailand said she wanted the female lead to write a fated romance using her name. After all, sooner or later, she would enter a political marriage with House Ambrosia. But in the novel, she wanted to love someone she truly loved to her heart's content. The female lead agreed, making Thailand the mother of the female lead's child. As a result, just like Thailand in that novel, she did not fall in love with Duke Ambrosia, her political marriage partner, but instead fell in love with his younger brother, Hugo. She became pregnant with a child who should not have existed. According to the novel she had written, that child was the male lead of the novel Claude. Had she known this, she would never have given the characters in her novel the names of real people. The child would bear the curse that the ducal house of Ambrosia had been unable to escape for generations. Fortunately, however, he now had the female lead, and the female lead would stay by his side, preventing the events of the future from happening. Here, upon meeting him, the female lead's heart blossomed with joy. This child was even cuter than she had imagined. The female lead's reaction shocked even the maid. Unexpectedly, the little boy directly shook off her hand and ran to the maid, telling the female lead to leave. The maid was very worried that the female lead would lose her temper. After all, the Duke had instructed them to receive Sarah with the highest etiquette. Just then, a sudden voice made the maids busy. Claude had not expected his father to return so quickly. He hurriedly wanted to wash and tidy himself. At that moment, the female lead felt her chance had come and offered to help him. But before the Duke arrived, there was one condition. The female lead could help him, but he had to agree to let her become his wet nurse. While he was still hesitating, the Duke was about to arrive. The Duke had abandoned an important meeting to come see him. In the end, Claude hastily nodded and agreed. After all, he did not want his father to hate him. The female lead thought, how could the Duke possibly hate him? And she cast magic on him. In an instant, he was perfectly tidied up. At that moment, the Duke arrived. He was somewhat shocked. Why was the room such a mess, while Claude stood there neatly dressed? Claude looked frightened and hid behind the female lead. The female lead was somewhat surprised. She had not expected the Duke to be so handsome. In either world, he was the best-looking man she had ever seen. When he saw the female lead, he paused slightly. Then he politely welcomed the female lead. The female lead could not understand why Thailand had not fallen for the Duke. After a round of polite greetings, the Duke crouched down and praised Claude, expressing satisfaction with his behavior. Claude was very happy to be praised. The female lead felt the two of them looked very much alike. Although the Duke was not his biological father, they truly were family. Duke Ambrosia's reputation was well-deserved. He was a gentle, refined, and tactful man. Even the old emperor did not dare slight him. In the future I foresaw, the one who destroyed the empire was not Claude, but the man standing before me. Thailand once said that Duke Ambrosia was gentle and considerate to everyone. No one could leave a special mark in his heart. He treated everyone equally and would not fall in love with anyone. He was under a curse that made people cold-hearted. Hugo had also said that no matter how hard he tried, he could never gain a place in his elder brother's heart. The female lead wondered whether Thailand knew more inside details. Just by looking, he did not seem like the kind of person Thailand described. The Duke's question interrupted the female lead's thoughts. He mentioned that someone had used magic in the mansion, so he had hurried over. When he arrived, he saw shattered glass windows and a blasted door. Yet the Duke did not blame the female lead. The matter ended there. From Claude's perspective, his father's attention was entirely on the wet nurse. If he had caused such trouble, he would definitely have been harshly scolded. Then he noticed that both he and his father had blonde hair. After hearing the story about his mother, he had thought he was all alone in the world, but their resemblance seemed to say otherwise. Seeing the Duke's disheveled appearance, he thought that this was what his father looked like when he cared about him. He did not seem so frightening, but just as Claude was about to take his hand, he noticed that his father's eyes looked terrifying. The Duke looked somewhat hesitant, and the female lead noticed that he was avoiding Claude's touch. Seeing that Claude was about to cry, the female lead directly picked him up and placed him in the Duke's arms. The two faced each other awkwardly. The female lead saw how stiff they were and cheerfully reminded the Duke about his posture. She taught him how to hold a child. This way, perhaps the two of them would feel much more at ease. Unexpectedly, the atmosphere between them froze completely, frightening even the maids watching. The female lead thought that it seemed this was as far as they could go for now. The emperor and the nobles were the two irreconcilable forces in this empire. However, there was one person who had gained the trust of both sides. He was the head of House Ambrosia, Duke Isin. Although only he himself knew how twisted his heart truly was. Ever since the female lead rewrote things, his future had indeed been changing little by little. In the past, he had protected the ducal estate alone. Now, he had one more family member. Perhaps the clue to changing both him and the future lay with Claude. And the female lead had to find Isin's other side. But right now, the female lead was somewhat speechless. It seemed the Duke had never held Claude before. And now, besides educating Claude, she had gained one more task to do. Before the female lead came, they had agreed on several things. First, the task of educating Claude would be entrusted entirely to Sarah. Second, all activities necessary during his education would be the Duke's responsibility. While actively assisting, the Duke was not to interfere with Sarah's decisions. The Duke was to trust Sarah completely. He had already agreed to the above terms. And now, the female lead needed him. The female lead's words stunned the maids. What she needed was his time. The Duke looked troubled. Ever since His Majesty announced his intention to abdicate, undercurrents had been surging among the nobles. He had no free time at all right now. The female lead only needed him to spare 3 hours. The Duke thought that he had originally been relieved she had come, but now things had suddenly become troublesome. Emperor Kairos was already 80 years old this year, and he was also the most powerful emperor in history. He had 3 imperial sons, yet had still not named an heir. Duke Isin maintained neutrality, but that method could not last much longer. The Duke had no time to waste on such trivial matters, but that child had to have Sarah by his side because the curse that House Ambrosia could not escape was taking root and sprouting inside that child. Sooner or later, the Duke would need Sarah's power. To prove this, the female lead had even sent a magic tool along with her letter, and only that magic tool had controlled the restless power within the Duke's body. After wearing it for the first time in his life, the Duke experienced the feeling of being freed from the restraints of that power. Seeing his conflicted expression, the female lead shortened the time to 2 hours. Thinking that the female lead could lift the curse, the Duke was just about to agree for Claude's sake when the female lead added another condition. It was said that he always ate simple meals. From now on, the Duke also needed to have breakfast together with young Master Claude. The Duke was astonished. Tylan had faked her death 6 years ago. Rumor had it that the young Countess had been living in seclusion, yet she knew his private life in detail. She was from a prestigious family, the cherished jewel of the house of Count Millen, and one of the most outstanding noble ladies in high society. Everyone knew the young Countess was as beautiful as a flower. Although other hot-blooded noblemen spoke of her eagerly, he had not been very interested. And now she was even using his personal time to arrange for him and young Master Claude to play happily together. Claude, on the other hand, was very happy. Only then did he understand that this had been the female lead's goal. Suddenly, a knight came running over, panting. They were somewhat surprised. The newcomer threw himself straight to the ground. He blamed the Duke for running off on his own and jumping directly out of the carriage, frightening them badly. The female lead was breaking into a cold sweat. What was going on? He was the captain of the Ambrosia Knights, Jed, and he had just been somewhat rude. Jed was surprised. Claude was actually being obediently held in a stranger's arms. The Duke, meanwhile, asked with concern whether the letter had been handled properly. Jed was somewhat speechless. The Duke clearly knew it was important, yet he had left without permission. On the surface, the Duke said he had not meant to, but in truth, he had done it deliberately. He was very puzzled as to why there had been such a huge commotion just now. When he saw the female lead, he seemed to understand what had happened. The Duke signaled to the female lead that he had matters to attend to and would take his leave first. The female lead did not mind him leaving and was also pleased by his cooperation. If he could settle today's incident, she would not mind shortening it by another hour. That was no problem. The Duke directly dragged Jed away. Before leaving, however, the Duke did not look at Claude again. Before he left, he instructed that everyone below had to watch their tongues. After coming out, the Duke asked Jed for information about the female lead. Only then did he learn how great her influence was. Before she had even held her coming-of-age ceremony, she had already been in charge of etiquette education for the late Duchess and Her Imperial Highness the Princess. Moreover, she did not want the world to know she could use magic. To save her precious time, the Duke would help keep her secret all along. But the young Countess had displayed her power in the most conspicuous place in the ducal estate. Some little rats might come to cause trouble, but if that happened, things would become interesting for him. The person inside the carriage was very afraid. He smiled at the person before him and said, "Little rat." Jed told him to control his strength. They still had to take this man to attend the Imperial Council. It would be a pity to kill him now. He merely said that the man must have now felt just how heart-wrenching the price of betraying him was. He had turned his back on House Ambrosia and run off to become the first prince's loyal dog. Perhaps the merciful first prince would spare him for that. But simply because he had caused the three brothers to fall out completely, the other two princes would not let him go. Following the first prince's orders, he had been hiding in the ducal estate for 10 years. Now, he had finally investigated the truth behind their family's curse. But the Duke had discovered him long ago, altered the contents of the letter into the weaknesses of the other two princes, and then had it delivered to the first prince. As the Count of Ambrosia, he would not allow the family's secrets to leak out. Therefore, he believed the person before him should be able to understand him. After a while, Jed walked over and asked whether it was finished. The Duke directly ordered them to go to the Imperial City. As for the person before them, in his current state, he seemed to have become a lifeless doll. The Duke's power truly was formidable. Jed noticed that the Duke's ring was broken. The Duke hoped that Sarah's power could also help Claude. The two had been waiting for the female lead for a long time. The female lead discovered that they were twins: Berlin, the butler of the Ambrosia estate, and Rhonda, the headmaid. As expected of the Empire's only ducal house, she could tell these two servants had received professional training. Moreover, from beginning to end, they were exactly the same as the characters described in the novel. Not long ago, in Claude's bedroom, the female lead had thought Claude was unhappy because his time alone with his father had been shortened. Only after asking did she learn that he felt he had made things difficult for his father. He was also worried that the Duke would find it troublesome. The female lead thought that, sure enough, this child had a precocious side. I had investigated Claude's situation in advance. Not only had he already begun learning the Imperial language, he was also working hard on noble etiquette by himself. Faced with such an honest and adorable child, even the iron-hearted Duke should not be able to remain completely unmoved. The female lead felt he could act a little spoiled in front of the Duke, but Claude said his father did not like him. Even though the female lead had obtained private time with the Duke for him, he was still unhappy, thinking the female lead had caused trouble for his father. The moment she said they might cancel it, Claude began to object. Seeing him like this, the female lead found it very amusing. She said that she liked him very much because he was so cute. She told him to prepare himself to spend every moment with her. Then the female lead left Claude. Claude only felt that his wet nurse was a strange person. On this side, the female lead heard them say the Duke had given an order. All servants were to attend to her as they would the Duchess. She seemed to understand how May had always misunderstood Claude. The Duke's orders could indeed make people misunderstand them in another way. Today, May had almost ruined the female lead's plans, so Sarah made the tray grow heavier as a small punishment. Although the servants all seemed to hope she would dismiss May, the female lead did not want to cause a butterfly effect. May was also a character who appeared in the novel. She wanted to know why May remained by Claude's side until the very end, because the novel had not explained that part in detail. The butler crouched down and took out an object. This was the power of House Ambrosia. The female lead recognized it at a glance. It could make an ordinary branch completely wither because it desired to seize life force, robbing and devouring other lives directly. Once this power ran wild, it would madly absorb all life force around it, and in the end, even the host itself would suffer backlash and die. To thoroughly study it, ever since Claude's birth, she had isolated herself in the magic tower for 6 years. If this power could not be controlled, both the Duke and Claude would be in danger. In the future she had foreseen, it was precisely this power that led to the destruction of the world. The Duke had previously lost control. The ring could no longer stop his rampage. Signs would also begin appearing on Claude's body. As he continued to grow, the dormant power within him would gradually awaken and strengthen. That was because the black power of House Ambrosia fed on despair. He had grown up without a mother, and no one around him cared for him. The Duke himself also possessed negative power, so he avoided Claude. When the Duke lost control that time, it not only affected this tree, but also stole their expressions. This was likely the test the Duke had given her, and the female lead was happy to prove her ability. She restored the branch to its original state. They could not believe that a dead branch had come back to life. The female lead said to them, "Before you lose all sensation, let's begin quickly." If she could not handle this matter properly, then no matter how great a maid she was, Duke Ambrosia would drive her out of the estate. This test was not simple. If one had to ask what was difficult about it, it was that her body was beginning to fail. In the end, the female lead succeeded. The two would never forget the female lead's kindness. They left, leaving only the female lead alone. After 6 years of research, she had ultimately reached a conclusion. Once life force was taken by the Black Power, magic could not reverse it. The power of House Ambrosia desired and seized all life. Therefore, she could only pay the price with her own life force, using magic to help other lives return to their original state. To resolve Claude's misfortune, she had to start from the source and extinguish the bud of the curse. After all, if too much life force was drawn out, she would die young. She had to stay by Claude's side and do everything she could for his happiness. For the past 6 years, she had been researching how to mobilize the magic of the other world to kill Park Hae-yun. Although she would cough up a little blood, it likely would not have much effect on this body. If she coughed up blood a few more times, Park Hae-yun might die. But perhaps that would be fine too. Actually, that would be fine. She did not want to survive in two worlds. The female lead did not know whether Tylin had found Hugo or whether she was living well. However, no matter what Tylin had become, she still occupied the most important place in the female lead's heart, and she too would keep doing her best. Seeing the letters, the female lead felt very speechless. Her disciples were all urging her to return. She merely had one clear symptom, yet they acted as if she were about to drop dead immediately. She might have made the disciples in the magic tower worry too much. Back when she was researching souls and lacked manpower, she had told all her disciples her secret. As a result, they always overprotected her. Fortunately, when she stayed in the magic tower, she hid her appearance and voice, so they had no idea of her true identity. Unexpectedly, even Belluna had left that kind of message, saying she wanted to come find her. That made the female lead feel a little guilty. The servants of the house of Count Millen, Yuri and Dean, ran over with tears in their eyes. They wanted the female lead to stay at home. But it was not as if the female lead would never come back. She felt they were being too dramatic. The female lead was comforting them, while nearby maids were gossiping. As the heir to a count's house, she was now going to be a wet nurse. Naturally, the servants of the count's house must be unwilling as well. At that moment, Claude wanted to find May. He believed that besides May, only Rhonda and Berlin cared about him. As he was thinking about how to rescue May, the female lead appeared before him and called his name. He immediately hid behind someone else. The maid explained that he might be shy around strangers. The female lead felt he was sulking and lifted him high into the air. The maids were packing the luggage, while the female lead wanted to play with him. But Claude said he did not know how to play, because no one liked playing with him. The female lead said everyone must like him. Looking at him, the confused female lead asked why he did not believe her. He directly got down and said the female lead did not understand anything. But the female lead knew everything. She was a great mage, after all. She dared guarantee that everyone cared about him. They were just too afraid. After all, no matter how strong a person was, once they possessed something too precious, they would become cautious and afraid of losing it. Her words were so difficult for him to understand. He had no idea what she was talking about, but he was willing to believe the female lead for now. Then he ran off. He told the female lead to hurry and follow him, since they had agreed to play together. This made the female lead somewhat emotional. I believe that those who, despite hearts covered in wounds, are still ready to open their hearts at any time are the bravest people in the world. At the ducal estate, I caused a great commotion by blowing up the door. Yet the empire remained peaceful without any rumors spreading. Even though a mage had finally appeared in the empire after 10 years, everyone had no reaction. This was thanks to the loyalty of the ducal family servants. If that information were sold, one could probably live without worry for the rest of one's life. Claude was practicing dining etiquette. The female lead praised him for learning quickly, but he still asked the female lead to check again. She had already checked 5 times. This was his first time dining alone with his father, and he did not want any mistakes. The female lead felt he was so well behaved, but if he was too nervous, he might make a mistake. However, the female lead would be beside him to help. At that moment, the female lead wanted to make a bet with Claude. Because the Duke was busy with official duties, the dishes prepared by the kitchen this time would all be served at once. Claude was somewhat surprised. The female lead then asked him which dish the Duke would eat first. He thought for a moment and guessed bread. The female lead nodded. She guessed salad. If he won, the female lead would have the Duke reward him once. And she kept her word. Claude was very happy and wanted them to go together. The dining room was exquisite and splendid. The seats were soft. Claude was astonished. All of this had actually been prepared by his wet nurse. The dining room had originally been large and frightening, and his chair had been especially hard. Every time he sat in it, his bottom hurt. But now, everything was completely different. He looked at the female lead in great confusion. She always smiled at him. No matter what he did, she responded positively. This was the first time he had met such a person. At that moment, the Duke arrived. Seeing that the female lead had arrived quite early, she signaled Claude to greet him. He glanced at his father and finally spoke. The Duke responded to him as well, then brushed past him. The female lead patted his shoulder and said he had done well. Claude was very happy. At the table, everyone was eating while the female lead stood beside them. The Duke had clearly advised her to sit down, and the female lead had once said that she was only a wet nurse and did not need such high etiquette. She always made the Duke feel very troubled. But right now, there was something more important. Why? From just now, could he feel such an intense gaze? He noticed that Claude was looking at him. He did not know whether it was his imagination, but he felt Claude seemed to be begging him to do something. In his heart, Claude silently chanted, "Choose the bread." In the end, however, the Duke ate the salad. Claude was shocked and suddenly became very dejected. In truth, he really wanted to receive his father's praise. Also, apart from the eye contact they had when he greeted his father, the Duke had not looked at him again. He thought his father must hate him. As a result, he accidentally knocked his cup to the floor. Everyone was startled. Claude paniqued. The Duke noticed the situation and saw that Claude's face was pale. He was somewhat worried and asked whether Claude was hurt. At that moment, the female lead sat down. She said she would dine with them. The servants hurriedly brought tableware. Claude found it strange, since his wet nurse had previously said it was against etiquette. The female lead directly made an excuse, saying that it was fine this way too, and then spoke about mages. The Duke was rather curious about the explosions that often came from research in the magic tower. The female lead found him strange. However, she did not mind helping him fulfill that wish. At that moment, the Duke tactfully declined. He did not want the precious things in his home blown away. While doing so, he casually cut a piece of meat for Claude. The female lead noticed Claude's expression. The Duke cherished Claude even more than she had imagined. The Duke asked the female lead why she liked Claude. The female lead said, "How could anyone not like a child as composed and adorable as the young master?" In truth, to the Duke, he already felt incredibly fortunate that the young countess, a mage, was willing to stay by Claude's side. Yet her affection for Claude seemed not to be simply because Claude was her friend's child. If someone asked him whether he had taken good care of Claude, he probably could not answer easily, because in front of him, Claude had never shown that childish expression that only a child should have. However, he hoped Claude could also learn to be wary of false affection. At that moment, a maid told the Duke that the carriage had been prepared. Claude was somewhat reluctant. The Duke only glanced at him and then left. At that moment, he was suddenly shocked. The female lead actually told Claude to see him off. The female lead said that if he went to see the Duke off, the Duke would surely be even more motivated. How lonely it must be for the Duke to go to work alone. As a result, Claude felt sympathy for him. The Duke was not used to such a grand send-off, but since Claude looked happy, he let it be. The female lead saw that his tie was a little crooked. She wanted to help him fix it, but he avoided her. He told the female lead not to get too close. He did not want to trouble her into providing more help. The female lead asked how much he knew about her magic. The Duke's understanding was limited to that ring. The female lead asked whether he was not looking forward to her astonishing strength erupting. At that moment, he remembered that time. His father had told him to accept that power, and he had accepted it to do what he wanted to do. At Claude's bedside, he had once sensed that power. His power was very strong. He might become an even more powerful monster than his father, and he held no other expectations for the female lead's power. At that moment, the female lead wanted to touch him, as long as her magic would not harm him. He asked the female lead whether she was not afraid. After all, he seemed to hear the screaming of the cursed power. It was his own craving for that power, as if urging him to devour it and hurry to make it his own. However, the female lead grabbed him. She was very confident in her own strength. She believed she could protect them well. The female lead used magic to repair his ring. The female lead's existence was truly beneficial to their family. Looking at the ring before him, the female lead showed it off to him and said, "See, it's fixed." He felt as if he had been redeemed. But in this world, there was no salvation without a price. Although she had performed well, controlling this power was by no means an easy matter. Yet the female lead always displayed calm, 100% goodwill, causing him not only to suspect that she had another purpose, but also to notice that she was smaller and thinner than he had imagined, despite possessing such great power. Seeing him tidy her hair for her, the female lead thanked him. Then the female lead walked to Claude's side and said something to him. He hoped the female lead had some ulterior motive after all. A mutually beneficial relationship was safer. The female lead leaned close to Claude's ear and told him to say goodbye to his father. When she looked back, the Duke's expression was very frightening. The two did not quite understand what the problem was. But since the female lead had finally repaired his ring, she could not let him leave without gaining anything. The female lead wanted him to experience ordinary life, saying good morning to one another in the morning, wishing family members safety when they went out, and happily welcoming them when they returned. These were all the daily routines of an ordinary family. In the end, Claude mustered his courage, called out to his father, and told him to be careful on the road. The Duke was also very happy and thanked him for seeing him off. Claude's heart bloomed with joy, and he asked the female lead again whether she had heard it. Of course, the female lead had heard the Duke thank him. The maids were also happy for him. Just as they were about to go back, the female lead unexpectedly handed over an envelope. Opening it, he discovered that it was an entry pass for the Imperial Palace. Without it, Isam would not be able to enter the palace. The female lead told Claude to personally deliver it to the Duke in time. This was something the female lead had stolen with practical magic while pretending to help him straighten his tie. On the other side, May was grumbling about the female lead. Not long ago, she had secretly watched Claude and discovered that the young master was smiling happily. It was the first time she had ever seen him smile so brightly. She mocked under her breath, saying what was so cute about a brat who had killed his own mother. The female lead walked over and cast magic, making her fall. The female lead did not understand why she hated Claude so much. After a moment of silence, May said she could not stand it. Clearly, so many people loved him, yet Claude pessimistically said no one loved him. Claude had lost his mother just like her. Every day, she had worried about being beaten to death by her father, beaten by her brothers, and denied food by her family. She had no right to long for anyone's love, but Claude clearly had that right, and he did not need to beg anyone in order to survive. That alone made him a blessed existence. The female lead thought it might be because of the novel's influence. While everyone feared that repulsive cursed power and did not dare approach the young master, only May remained by Claude's side. In truth, when she saw Claude, she felt they shared the same suffering. From that moment, she no longer hated him. Now she deliberately said belittling words about him because the young countess had appeared by his side. May had secretly seen Sarah purify the curse. It was obvious the curse seemed to place a burden on Sarah's body. In the end, May asked if Sarah continued purifying it. Would young Master Claude die in the end? Seeing the female lead remain silent, May felt she had guessed correctly. She also sensed the female lead's intention, and she was very unwilling to accept it. Why would someone like Sarah appear in Claude's life? Was it only because he was still young? When she mentioned that the female lead might be aiming for the position of Duchess, the female lead's expression turned icy. She did not mind giving May a little punishment. The female lead told her to wake up. In truth, to May, the two of them were indeed very different. Just as May was about to accidentally fall, the female lead supported her with magic and sighed. The female lead wanted to pull her up. Claude called to the female lead from a distance to go to the Imperial Palace. At that moment, the female lead pulled May toward her and said that none of this was her fault, and the fact that her mother protected her until she was born proved that her mother loved her. Then the female lead left. Standing at the gate with Claude, Claude said they were going to deliver the entry pass to his father. Only after learning who his father was did he understand why the instructors had left in tears. Because the Duke had gone in without an entry pass. This was not originally a big matter, but those hostile to the Duke would certainly use it as an excuse to cause trouble. Just as he was feeling sad about being dragged into this kind of matter, he saw that the gatekeeper was very troubled. The female lead directly used her own entry pass to enter. The gate opened. Claude was pleasantly surprised. The place was magnificent and dazzling. Seeing him so happy, the female lead thought she would not mind bringing him here for a walk every day. Before holding their coming-of-age ceremonies, Noble children had to be accompanied by their parents in order to enter the imperial palace. Noble children would compare how many times they had come, using it to prove how much their parents cared for and loved them. But the Duke had never brought him even once. In fact, this matter was quite important among noble children. The female lead planned to visit the rose garden near the emperor's palace. Claude was very happy. Although he had not received his father's approval, he could finally regain some face in front of the noble children. At that moment, the female lead sensed an aura approaching. Claude hurried to find his father and deliver the letter, not noticing the person in front of him. He accidentally fell down. Looking up at the person before him, he wondered who this was. Claude saw that this person's gaze was terrifying. At that moment, the female lead embraced him. Jed ran over to report to the Duke that the female lead and Claude had entered the palace. On their way to find him, they had encountered His Highness, the First Prince. The Duke was shocked. The First Prince glared at the female lead through gritted teeth. He had not expected to meet her here. The female lead frowned. He was the old emperor's most beloved son, yet also the son he hated most. He had already reached the age to inherit the throne, but the emperor's refusal to abdicate filled him with resentment. In the end, he fell into madness and became the shame of the Crumbel Empire. Since he had not seen the female lead for a long time, he kept smiling as he asked her about that matter. Now, his emotions were very agitated. Claude was heartbroken to see the female lead injured. He felt that it was because of him that his wet nurse had been hurt. The female lead used magic to comfort him, indicating that she was fine. Claude relaxed a great deal, relieved that she was all right. Unable to stand Sarah's smile, the First Prince tried to cut Claude down, and Sarah's magical power still had not recovered lately. At the dangerous moment, the First Prince's sword was severed. Fortunately, the Duke rushed over in time. The First Prince fell into a frenzy, but the Duke could not use his power right now. If he attacked the First Prince here, the other princes would join hands to seize House Ambrosia by the throat. Yet seeing such a scene, how could he possibly stand by and do nothing? And so, he used his power. He slammed him to the ground. Using that power made him feel very good. The First Prince began cursing the Duke as a monster, and even said Claude had brought about his own mother's death. Hearing this, the Duke smiled as he looked at him. Since he knew so much, surely he did not think he could leave this place alive. Then the Duke drew his sword, worried that his power would run wild. Sarah stopped him, saying this would be bad for the child's education. The Duke agreed. The First Prince was still attacking Sarah with his words, saying Sarah was being kept alive on her knees by cursed power, and that was why she protected the monster who had killed her friend. Only then did Claude learn that Sarah had been his mother's friend. The Duke was furious when he heard this, but the First Prince was not afraid at all. With such a commotion here, the royal knights throughout the imperial palace should arrive very soon. As he shouted, Sarah cast magic on him and covered up his wounds. At that moment, many people were drawn over, not only the knights, but also the servants in the palace, as well as the nobles who had come to attend a meeting. His face was extremely pale. Seeing the wounds on Sarah's body, everyone began whispering among themselves. Then, through Jed's guidance, everyone was shocked. The First Prince had actually drawn a sword on a child. Sarah felt Jed was far too clever. Meanwhile, when the First Prince showed his own wounds, no one believed him, because there was not a single injury on him. Everyone thought he had gone completely mad. The knights wanted to take him away. At that moment, the Emperor arrived. The Duke bowed and stepped back. The Emperor wanted to meet the Crown Prince candidate alone and told the Duke to return first. He would discuss matters with him later. At that moment, Sarah suddenly collapsed. Blood was flowing non-stop from her neck. The Duke wanted to hurry back. When he turned his head, he found Claude's face deathly pale. Only the two of them remained. The First Prince shouted at the Emperor, telling him everything that had just happened. The Emperor told him to shut up. No matter what had happened, he had already disgraced himself completely, and he had wasted a perfect opportunity. He told the First Prince to find his own way out. Besides, the truth was not important. As long as they created public opinion and forced the Duke to use that power in front of everyone, they could drive him into a dead end. If that happened, perhaps even, the proud mage standing beside him would also come over to his side, and he would prove to the world his ability as the future emperor. At that moment, Claude sank into deep self-reproach. Whenever he became even slightly happy, misfortune would immediately follow. At that moment, Sarah flicked his forehead. She comforted him, saying she was a powerful mage and that he was all right. Seeing Sarah safe, the Duke also breathed a sigh of relief. There were too many people here. If she used healing magic, she would be discovered immediately, so she had done this on purpose. Who would have thought Claude would suddenly burst into tears? Both of them were shocked, and now that the Duke's ring had shattered, he could not touch Claude either. Claude directly took out the letter, saying the Duke had forgotten to take it. It had not been anything important, but Claude had gone out of his way to deliver it to him. This made the Duke feel very moved. He looked towards Sarah, and she reminded him that he could hold Claude. Nothing would happen now. In that instant, the Duke simply wanted to hug Claude. Sarah also felt deeply comforted. At that moment, the carriage finally arrived. The Duke directly picked Sarah up with one arm as well. Sarah felt a little embarrassed. That night, Claude finally fell asleep. Sarah told the Duke he could leave and that she would watch over Claude. Seeing how attentively Sarah cared for the child, he found himself somewhat unwilling to go. The Duke wanted her to go rest. Sarah had just been about to refuse when she noticed Claude had woken up. He looked toward his father. The Duke decided to leave later. Claude was very happy. Sarah immediately teased him, bringing up the fact that he had cried, making Claude extremely embarrassed. Seeing that even the Duke could not help laughing, Claude directly said he hated both his father and his wet nurse. This was the moment that struck the Duke the hardest. Claude hid under the blanket and refused to come out. Sarah hurriedly urged the Duke to coax him too. Who would have thought the Duke would try to give Claude a mind to play with? Sarah was stunned. Sarah felt she needed to have a private talk with him. In the end, Claude fell asleep, and the Duke's proposal was rejected. The Duke could not help stroking Claude's head. Sarah felt that, deep down, he must love young Master Claude. The more one cherished something, the more careful one became. The Duke did not deny it either. Sarah thought to herself, what would Isen's life path become? In the future, would he become the monster who destroyed the Empire? Although many things had changed because of her intervention, she did not know whether this world's fate would truly change. The Duke told Sarah that if he stayed by Claude's side, it would encourage Claude's power to grow. And the Duke did not want Claude to become like him, exhausting his mind and spirit merely to control that power. When he described that feeling as a kind of yearning, Sarah grabbed his hand and quickly confirmed something, asking him to help her with one matter. As she spoke, Sarah began activating magic. The word yearning had also appeared in the novel. Claude's power came from Claude despising himself for being unable to receive love. That was why, after meeting the heroine, he was able to break free of his role as a villain and become the male lead. The heroine satisfied his yearning for love, so his power could no longer grow by drawing on the yearning within his heart. The family's power weakened along with it. So Isen was the crucial key to resolving the crisis of the world's destruction. Sarah explained to him that during the 6 years she had disappeared, she had been researching his family's power. Sarah understood that power very well, and she had promised that she would give young Master Claude a happy future, including him. He did not understand why. Sarah said directly that Claude, without his father, would not be happy. This made the Duke think of his own past. His father had once refused to let him drink even a drop of water. Only by driving him into a desperate situation would his power erupt. And the former Duke had said that all of that pain was love. But he had never expected Claude to love him, a father who had never given him love. He understood far too little about his own child. The Duke did not believe Sarah would help him unconditionally, so he asked what her terms were. Sarah had already received her reward from Claude, but if he insisted on a request that would put him at ease, she wanted the Duke to call her directly by her name. The Duke agreed, and Sarah was very happy. Looking at Sarah before him, he actually felt a little embarrassed. Sarah happily said that now she could pester young Master Claude into changing how he addressed her. Then, holding Claude, she gave the Duke an order to leave. The Duke was somewhat speechless, wondering if all mages were like this. Then he left. Only when she saw the door close did Sarah get up. She could not help spitting out blood. She had truly overexerted herself today. Drawing on Park Hae-yun's magical power and life force from another dimension consumed a tremendous amount of stamina. Unexpectedly, someone suddenly came in, and Sarah had not even noticed. She had not expected that although he knew about her condition, he was willing to conceal it and help her. He was very good at reading the room. It seemed he was fighting for his own chance. He had once sincerely cared for the young master and wanted to stay. Although the young count's tone was cold, he was willing to listen to him, and he had taken to heart what Sarah had said to him before. Sarah began testing him to see whether he was truly loyal and devoted to Claude. Clearly, he passed the test. He quickly changed the betting. Looking at the young master before him, he understood that the person he had always hated here was himself. He brought Sarah flowers, the flowers young Master Claude liked, because the young master thought they resembled the Duchess in the portrait. Sarah did not know whether it had been the right choice to draw May into this. But before the heroine appeared, he had always been by the young master's side and was connected to every matter. He might also have overheard what she said, which must have caused him a strange misunderstanding. Because of the magical oath with her disciples, she could not reveal the existence of her other self, so she simply decided not to explain. Suddenly, Sarah did not know where she had come to. She actually saw her present self. Originally, she had been unable to see what she looked like with her eyes closed. But now, she was looking down at herself. The doctors were discussing her condition. In just one night, she had suffered 2 cardiac arrests, and there had been massive bleeding as well. These should have been caused by Sarah's side. She thought that if her present body died outright, then her magical power would return, and perhaps she could seal the cursed power of House Ambrosia. She hoped Park Hae-yun would die quickly. But Park Hae-yun actually shed tears and even opened her eyes. This made Sarah suddenly wake up in shock. They had clearly met each other's eyes. This was not a dream. At that moment, Claude suddenly called out. With tears in his eyes, he thought Sarah was going to die. He even alarmed the butler and the maids. They were going to call the Duke. May was also watching from outside. It turned out she had already been unconscious for 3 days. This was the first time she had personally seen her sleeping body. Not only that, even if she originally lived for a long time in one dimension, only one day would pass in the other dimension. Yet at this moment, that rule had completely broken down. The Duke arrived very quickly and approached Sarah, deeply worried about her health. Seeing him directly call her by her name, she actually felt a little embarrassed. At that moment, Claude cut in, saying he was also very worried about Sarah's health. Unexpectedly, Sarah had also awakened midway and said not to contact the Count Millen family, then fell asleep again. But whenever that happened, she only opened her eyes and stared blankly like a soulless doll. She had never spoken. In other words, when she woke up in one body, there had also been times when the other body awakened too. And her power could actually completely ruin Tylen's life, just as it had with the Claude and the Duke in her foreknowledge. He touched Sarah's forehead, wanting to call her attending physician over, or perhaps contact the temple. At that moment, Sarah looked at him. It was the first time she had seen him so anxious. When Sarah asked about the first prince, the Duke told the people nearby to leave. They had something to discuss. As soon as he sat down, the Duke asked Sarah whether her collapse had been because of that power. Seeing that he had not directly asked if it was because of Claude, Sarah told him not to worry. The Duke could only believe what she said for now, but he was still very worried about Sarah's health. After all, his power devoured those around him. The Duke suddenly fell into self-blame. Unexpectedly, Sarah suddenly grabbed his hand, telling him to be at ease and trust her, because her goal was to protect Claude until he grew up. The Duke finally understood the reason he had been so unsettled. It turned out he had been afraid that once Sarah woke up, she would run away, leaving him first filled with hope, and then plunged into despair, because she was the first person to reach out and save him. The Duke did not understand why Sarah was willing to give so much. Sarah thought for a moment. Perhaps it was because she liked Claude. After all, even when she had been in the Magic Tower, she had always been concerned about him. After meeting him that day, she truly came to like him. But who told the person before her to be so adorable? Sarah did not necessarily have to say all of that. Unexpectedly, the Duke approached her and said she was a miraculous existence in Claude's and his own lives. Sarah felt he was playing unfairly. How could he smile like that? Suddenly, the Duke changed the subject to the first prince. The first prince was now going to publicly apologize to Sarah and Claude. In the Magic Tower, a man looked at the magic circle before him and said the room looked like a pigsty. Looking at the person inside the spell circle, the green-haired man frowned, thinking that he still had not stopped. Only after his name, Benjamin, was called did he raise his head, muttering something under his breath. Then he ignored him again. A white-haired woman stepped forward. The green-haired man struck up a conversation, saying that Benjamin had become like this and seemed even crazier than him. The white-haired woman replied that this was not necessarily true. He and Benjamin merely had different personalities, while their thoughts happened to be the same. The green-haired man slammed a fist on Benjamin's magical barrier, saying that no matter how much he talked, Benjamin had no reaction. Only when he mentioned clues about their master did Benjamin respond. To make him come out, the green-haired man said he knew a clue about their master and would share it with him once he came out. Benjamin immediately withdrew his magic. The moment he came out, he started fighting with the green-haired man. He kept asking where their master was. Benjamin attacked with lethal force. In front of their master, he had pretended to be mature and composed, but now he was as frenzied as a wild beast. Benjamin had long found the green-haired man unpleasant. Besides, their master had far too many disciples. seeing Benjamin become serious, the green-haired man hurriedly asked the white-haired woman for help. The white-haired woman remained unmoved. He ought to fix his bad habit of getting carried away. As they were fighting, someone came over to ask whether they still had not found their master. It was the fourth elder of the magic tower and his disciples. Ever since their master disappeared, this group of direct disciples had turned the magic tower upside down. Oliver, Benjamin, and Bellona. Bellona disliked others meddling in her affairs. She snapped her fingers. A large hole was blasted through the wall. The elder fled in fright, saying he would go find the second elder. The two men were also shocked that she had actually destroyed the magic tower's wall. How could they still have any mind to fight? Before this, Bellona had thrown them into the ever-sleeping swamp. Otherwise, they might have already found their master. Ever since their master had vanished without a word, he had been caught between the constantly deranged Benjamin and the oppressive Bellona, suffering greatly. He was still working hard to find their master's research subject. In other words, the owner of that mysterious power. Once he found him, he would definitely make him pay. Seeing how much they hated that place, Bellona pointed at Oliver and told Benjamin to stop paying attention to that fool. Oliver was nearly furious to death. Had they forgotten that their master's magic stone was in his hands? Oliver cried in front of the two of them, saying he missed their teacher so much, while they only cared about where their master was. In the end, the only information they had found was that their teacher was in the Krenbel Empire. Benjamin instantly became enraged. How much useful information was that? This magic stone held their teacher's magic in this world. One part was here, and the other was with their master. Their teacher had to use her own magic for the magic stone to react, but their teacher's own magic had always been in a sealed state. The magic stone had suddenly reacted because the two separated souls had briefly connected. After their teacher took them as disciples, she had told them many stories about herself. The greatest secret among them was that their teacher's soul had been split in two. Only at the instant her bodies exchanged would the two souls connect. But 6 years ago, their teacher became unable to go to the other world. That meant something must have happened to her in the Empire. As for what their teacher was doing in the Empire, that was none of their business. They only needed to find their teacher, and he did not feel he had said anything wrong. They had merely been lucky enough to be used by their teacher to study that hateful power. Bellona drew her sword. Oliver had actually insulted their teacher. It was unforgivable. Oliver told them to accept reality. After all, they did not even know what their teacher looked like. To their teacher, they did not have enough value to know everything. And researching that power was their value to their teacher. He planned to go find the owner of that power. Oliver possessed a frail and beautiful appearance, completely matching the image of a mage in people's minds. There had always been a reason for his caution. The three of them looked at one another. In the end, they made up their minds to start by finding their teacher. Someone was eavesdropping at the door, but they had cast a barrier spell, so he could not listen in. Still, something felt wrong. These people, who would go through fire and water for their teacher, what were they thinking this time? This was troublesome. He had better hurry and contact the Grand Elder. Oliver noticed someone was eavesdropping. Inside the room, Sarah heard his message. Her disciples were moving separately. She needed to prepare. She had not expected them to act so quickly. A maid came over and said Lord Claude was ready. Sarah transformed with a spell and said they should go greet him. Not long ago, the Duke had told Sarah that the first prince was holding a party to apologize. It was a small-scale party in the royal forest. An invitation from a prince could not possibly be a simple apology. For the Duke, this was an eye-opening opportunity to completely eliminate the first prince from the line of succession. The Duke already held hostility toward the first prince, so confronting him head-on was also fine. The Duke was worried. If Sarah could not accept the apology, he would not attend. After all, he was merely using this incident. But he was not the only person who truly had to accept the first prince's apology, so he could not make the decision. Sarah walked down the corridor, lost in thought. She actually had not accompanied Claude on his outing. This was the head maid's arrangement. She probably did not want Sarah and Claude to spend time together. There were 3 noble boys attending the party with the young master, young Viscount Naeven, the son of Baron Yukin, and the son of Count Parber. However, those 3 were not suitable playmates for young Master Claude. On this side, Claude accepted the first prince's invitation. He had asked for this on his own. In any case, he had not been injured. Only his wet nurse had been hurt. He did not care about the first prince's apology. He wanted to know why he had done it. His wet nurse had previously told him that she had already asked His Majesty to give up on the engagement between her and the first prince. Because Sarah had been very beautiful when she was young, the first prince had secretly loved her, but she had directly rejected him. He could not tell anyone about this. Now he had to greet the other noble boys. He tried hard to prepare himself mentally. At this party, he absolutely could not be nervous. At that moment, the three noble boys arrived. Claude's expression was very poor. At that moment, the butler came out to smooth things over. Seeing how respectful the butler was, young Viscount even thought his father would surely be very pleased if he knew. His father was very afraid of the Duke. His father had always taken pride in gatherings like this, and the role he played at such gatherings was very important. To earn his father's approval, he absolutely could not make a mistake at this gathering. The four of them began afternoon tea. Looking at Claude's expression, he was very dissatisfied. What was so fun about little brats meeting one another? His father had actually told him to curry favor with Claude. The maids were all secretly watching from a distance. The sons of Baron Yukin and Count Parber wanted to go to young Viscount Naiven's house to see the fox. Naiven glanced at Claude and agreed. Naiven was the young master in his own home. He had no intention of preserving his position by flattering that little brat. Thinking of swordsmanship training, Naiven picked up a fruit knife and mocked Claude, saying that if he practiced swordsmanship, he was only fit to hold a fruit knife. No matter how he looked at him, Claude was an eyesore. He forced Claude to pick up the fruit knife and swing it, wanting him to know who was the boss. Just then, a girl's voice rang out. Sarah had arrived. The young masters were stunned. Claude ran over and hugged his wet nurse. Even knowing that Sarah was Countess Millen, Naiven did not take her seriously. He still tried to force Claude to hold the knife. Sarah directly drew it away and stuck it into the ground by his feet. Sarah asked if he was all right. That had truly almost become an incident. Naiven's expression was very ugly. He had done it on purpose. His little companions were all pretending not to see. He also wanted to throw the small knife at that brat, but then realized he could not pull it out. Sarah smiled and asked whether they needed her help. The three of them were very frightened and immediately left. Sarah thought that they had finally left. Even with her present, Naiven had kept looking for chances to bully Claude. Stopping them had truly exhausted her. Naiven would attend the party hosted by the first prince, so she had originally wanted them to become familiar with one another. But she had not expected the children's relationship to be like this, and even less had she wanted Claude to be hurt. Everything those children had said to him had been malicious lies made up to bully him. He did not understand why everyone hated him so much when he only wanted to be friends with them. Sarah hugged him and told him that the way they acted was not necessarily their true feelings. Some people pretended to hate others in order to hide their own weakness. They were never willing to admit their weakness. Because they did not want to hate themselves, they could only pretend to hate him. Although he was very small, he was the beloved son of the most terrifying and powerful person in the world. Claude finally smiled. He said that was true. He did not want the Duke to know about this, but he was unwilling to explain the exact reason. Sarah did not press him. Sarah helped him understand that it was not good for adults to interfere too much in children's matters. Some things needed to be resolved on his own. Sarah took him and left. Since she was keeping his secret for him, she would collect a little reward. The maids were clearing the dishes when they discovered Sarah had directly taken Claude and flown into the sky. Sarah told them not to worry. They were only going out to play for a while and would come back, flying above the bustling market. Claude was not afraid at all as Sarah held him. On the first day, Claude had still hated her. If he had not needed a wet nurse, Sarah would have had to think of other methods. At some unknown point, Claude had begun to feel, simply by looking at his wet nurse, that someone supported him unconditionally. At that moment, Claude finally understood. His wet nurse had always been expressing her love for him. Awkwardly, Claude said he liked his wet nurse. This made Sarah very happy. Looking down at the market below, the ground was much larger than she had imagined. The two of them came to a corner. Sarah was in a very good mood. Not long ago, Claude had still been very guarded against her. Now even the Duke was beginning to trust her. Sarah quite missed the Duke's smile from that time. The two changed clothes and came to the market. Even in different clothes, Claude's noble air could not be hidden. Fortunately, she was there. Children would always stare at things they liked, just like they did. Claude was very adorable. Sarah conjured up a candy vendor, who received money that dropped from the sky. Suddenly, he noticed a child in the corner. That child seemed to be crying. Sarah recognized the pattern on the cloak at a glance. It was Elisa, the illegitimate son of the third prince, Lyrian, the second male lead for the heroine in the novel. Logically, he should not appear until much later. Why had he appeared now? Every time Sarah saw a character from the novel, she felt breathless, because they were children who originally should not have been born into this world. The two crouched to the side and watched Claude. Seeing him crying so sadly, they were very worried. After Claude grew up, the imperial family had already been slaughtered to the last. It was his appearance that had prevented the empire's decline. With Sarah's encouragement, Claude decided to go comfort him. Claude walked over and spoke to him. This was their first meeting. Sarah felt that both of them were very cute. Seeing that he only kept his head down and cried, Claude introduced himself first. Sarah also showed her own politeness. He lifted his head and introduced his name as well. Claude succeeded. Elise's father would come to see him after 5 nights, but he missed his father very much. The third prince was busy right now. The originally weak third prince had not planned to fight for the throne, but after falling in love with an Eastern woman born a slave and having Elisa with her, his fate changed from then on. No one could accept his lover and illegitimate son, so he had to win the throne. But even so, in the end, Claude would take everything from him. The third prince, who had finally seized the throne with great difficulty, would ultimately die as well. But if the two of them no longer became enemies, perhaps the ending would be different. Elisa had not wanted to stay at home, so he secretly slipped out. In any case, his father would not come back. The two of them were in similar circumstances. Claude was also very afraid of being hated by his father and did not dare disturb him. Unexpectedly, Elisa understood his feelings very well. This made Claude a little embarrassed, and he hurriedly said he still had his wet nurse. Looking at Elisa, Sarah thought he seemed to have a poor relationship with his wet nurse. Afraid he would feel uncomfortable, she gave him a piece of candy too. Compared with Naivan, Elisa was far more suited to becoming Claude's friend. But if the two grew close, it would involve the struggle for the throne. Sarah did not want to be the nanny who separated them. She had once wanted to live an ordinary life. But everything, the magic tower, the power, and her other self was dragging her toward the abyss. In the end, Sarah still said those words. They had to go back now, and they could play again next time. Claude secretly whispered something into his ear. The two exchanged a tacit glance. Then they left. Sarah felt something was strange. On the second prince's side, the atmosphere was very heavy. He had wanted to build connections, but now he had instead ruined them. Viscount Naivan was drenched in cold sweat, but with children's matters, he had no way to control them. He argued that the Duke did not mind this matter, but in reality, the Duke probably knew nothing about it. Otherwise, he absolutely would not let their family go. Viscount Naivan begged the prince for forgiveness. Viscount Naivan returned and looked at his own son. On this side, Claude had already memorized the list of nobles at the party. The party was tomorrow. He absolutely could not make a mistake. Although he felt afraid, he had to face all of this. He would accept the first prince's apology, and at the same time, he would make the prince apologize to his wet nurse. Because if he did not say it aloud, others would not understand. The day arrived as promised. Under everyone's gaze, the Duke attended as agreed. It was normal to bring the victims to an occasion like this. The veiled woman beside them drew everyone's attention. Sarah was somewhat unable to bear it. This kind of occasion was perfect for gossip. Everyone thought Countess Sarah had gone into seclusion, so no one recognized her with the veil on. They actually thought she was the newly married Duchess. She was very worried that they would say such things in front of child. But taking her anger out on low-ranking nobles in front of the first prince was not worth it either. What Claude had to do today was very simple. Sit there and do nothing. Not long ago, Sarah had made thorough preparations. The most important thing was ensuring his safety. At the banquet, he did not need to do anything, nor did he need to flatter anyone. At his age, he should follow his own heart. Sarah only hoped that when he grew up and discussed opinions or opened his heart to others, he would not be ignored because of a lack of social skills. She wanted him to be able to handle any situation properly in the future and always have people by his side. Sarah hoped he would be safe. Even if she was not beside Claude, the things he learned could protect him. Claude was somewhat dissatisfied. He felt she had said all of this for the party, and he also thought his wet nurse would protect him. Sarah felt rather emotional. She hoped he would become an upright person, both outwardly and inwardly. Claude fell asleep directly at the party. When he woke up, he sensed something over there. Turning his head, he found that Kai was also very tired. He planned to take a look and come back. Young Viscount Naivan saw everything from a distance. Sarah opened a pot lid. Good, this one was not poisoned either. Now only one table remained unchecked. The Duke walked over and said to her that he had already inspected the nobles and the places where they were staying. The people invited to the party were all those who had witnessed the incident that day. They must be very uneasy after being dragged into a disaster for no reason. Sarah guessed that perhaps the first prince wanted to shift the blame for his wrongdoing onto them. Unable to guess the first prince's thoughts, they could only sit and wait for now. The Duke felt Sarah was overthinking. When the Emperor saw that scene at the time, he had been furious. Even young Claude felt it was the first prince's fault. Perhaps that was why he was holding this party to apologize. No matter what, Sarah would never forgive him for doing that to such a young child. Everyone discussed it among themselves. To people, rather than criticizing the fault of the powerful, it was much easier to find fault with the weak. Although they did not want to become evildoers who supported the perpetrator, they also did not want to be dragged in. Standing aside was much simpler. Pushing the blame onto him in front of everyone would be the easier method. Suddenly, Kai hurried over and said the young master was missing. They had searched the entire party and had not seen him. The Duke was about to lose control. Sarah hurriedly stopped him. His anger would not solve anything. If others learned of his ability, and if this was something the first prince had done, the situation might become impossible to control. Sarah hurriedly persuaded him, saying they were also at fault for leaving Claude alone. Just when Sarah thought she could not stop him, he finally calmed down. He told Kai that if anything happened to Claude, Kai would pay with his life. They had searched everywhere. There was only one place they had not looked. Meanwhile, Claude had come to the forest. He felt this place was quite nice and wanted to bring his wet nurse here next time. Earlier, he had told Elisa that in 3 days, he would attend a party held in the forest, and they could meet in the small woods near the Imperial Palace. On the way to the forest, Elisa really wanted to see Claude again. Claude did not see Elisa. Instead, he saw young Viscount Naivin. He had clearly arranged to meet Elisa. Young Viscount Naivin told him to stop because they were already outside the adult's line of sight. The atmosphere between them was very tense because Claude was startled by his sudden appearance. He shoved him. Unexpectedly, Naivin did not react at all and sat silently on the ground. After a while, he said Claude should keep hitting him until his anger faded. His Highness the Crown Prince would arrive soon. The people of House Ambrosia had disappeared. Everyone guessed they had gone to welcome him. They also hoped the party would soften the atmosphere. The imperial family had specially held a party to apologize, so the Duke could also remain neutral because of it. As for the position of minor nobles like them, no one should care. His Highness the Crown Prince arrived, but the Duke was not with him. After hearing what the guard said to him, he actually laughed. He came over and said to everyone that he should originally have arrived first thing, knelt before everyone, and apologized to the Duke. But the guest of honor of the party was not there. Although the Duke's lateness was not part of his plan, this was even better. Everyone would blame the Duke amid their unease. He told everyone he could wait and that the party could not be ruined, so he had everyone raise their glasses with him. On this side, Claude was dumbfounded. Why was Naivin telling him to hit him? Although he was angry, hitting someone would not make his anger disappear. Hearing Claude's words, Naivin only felt he was pretending to be kind, pretending to let himself be bullied. He clearly did not need to pretend. After all, he had an almighty father as his tool. His father would not say everything was his fault and force him to apologize unconditionally. Even if Claude did not know what had happened, Naivin did not want to apologize to him. But Claude could hit him to vent his anger. When Claude heard this, he shouted at him. Naivin said all of this had been ordered by his father. But the one who had taken his anger out on Claude was clearly Naivin himself. These were clearly things Naivin himself had wanted to do. When Claude had pushed him just now, he had originally wanted to apologize, but now there was no need. In truth, before this, Claude had only been afraid of him and had not allowed himself to be angry with him. But now he was truly angry. Since Naivin did not want to know how he felt, he did not care either. The young Viscount, left standing there, deceived himself with his thoughts. He had not disappointed his father. His father had not knelt and begged Claude's father. How could all of this have been his fault? He hated seeing his father act respectfully toward a stuttering child. But now Claude had become frightening. It was only natural that Claude was angry. He called out to Claude, saying he had something to tell him. Unexpectedly, there was a monster behind him. Claude noticed it at that moment too. Isin had also arrived in the forest. He heard the monster's cry as well. There was movement all around. The Duke attacked swiftly and cut down the monster. They were stunned when they saw it. Around an ordinary party, it was impossible for so many monsters to be released. Yet monsters had appeared right before their eyes. But now was not the time to worry about where the monsters had come from. These monsters could distinguish their targets. And the one the monsters had their eyes on was not him, but the knight's life. Someone threw a stone at the monster. Claude was so frightened that he sat down on the ground. Elisa was in the distance. He was also very afraid, his whole body trembling uncontrollably. They told Claude to hurry and stand up, but he could not. Young Viscount Naivin was the one who pulled him up. The three of them quickly fled together. There were too many monsters. All they could do was run. Elisa blamed himself inwardly. He should not have come here on his own without listening to the adults. If they found out, he knew they would definitely punish him. If it had been the old Claude, he would certainly have thought the same. But right now, the first thing they had to do was survive. Still, they were driven into a dead end. Attacked by magical beasts, they fell into the river. Just as they wondered what they should do, they were suddenly pulled out of the water. Sarah had finally found this group of little troublemakers. Meanwhile, a man was imprisoned in the dungeon. Dark power. The first prince had experienced it himself, so he knew exactly what it was. It immediately reminded him of Jim. The first prince looked displeased. The fact that he had been captured was a great disappointment. It was because of his uselessness that he had suffered such humiliation. But things were different now. He could finally make himself useful again. Even if it was a mindless monster, as long as it ate him, it could absorb the Duke's power inside him. That way, he would become far more useful, so he could go in peace. Not long ago, Sarah had suggested splitting up the search. She knew that was reckless. If they moved together, it would be much safer. But the most important thing right now was Claude. They had to find him as quickly as possible. To them, nothing mattered more than him. On this side, the three children were crouching drenched in front of Sarah. The monsters had already been bound. If they had not been beside the stream, Sarah would not have been able to restrain them. Luckily, the children had fled here. Otherwise, she would not have been able to subdue these monsters, nor would she have been able to save them. She had truly thought she would be too late to catch them. The first prince looked around at the banquet, so the ninth duke had still not appeared. He must have entered the forest, and it seemed young Viscount Naivan had gone into the forest as well. He wondered whether the boy would make it back out. After all, the forest was supposed to contain only small animals. He also hoped the Duke would return safely on his own. That way, everyone would suspect that his motives were impure. Before the banquet began, he had told his son to apologize to the Duke at this moment, but his son had refused. He did not understand why his son kept disappointing him, so he said something cruel. If he did not apologize, he would no longer acknowledge him as his son. Now he regretted saying those words. At this point, he could not even go look for his son. The royal soldiers appeared, fully armed. But the first prince had clearly said there was no danger. Why were they being so cautious? Was it to ensure the safety of their subordinates? His Highness the Crown Prince explained to everyone that the Duke might have disappeared in the forest. He would send people to search immediately and asked everyone to wait for news. Viscount Naivan secretly took something out and fiddled with it. On the way back, they found a great deal of blood. The knights came looking for them. Thankfully, they were unharmed. Kai said that they had followed his grace's orders and run in the opposite direction. The magical beasts did not attack him, so he let the knights run first. The magical beasts along the path had all been killed by him. But after leaving these traces behind, the Duke disappeared. They had been searching nearby ever since. These magical beasts had been hacked beyond recognition. Sarah thought that, from the look of things, they had to find him as soon as possible. There was a chance he had lost his reason. Someone was watching the party from afar. The Duke looked at the people at the party with a numb expression. The power he had to hide and suppress no longer meant anything to him now. He wanted to kill him outright. A voice from behind stopped him in his tracks. Claude, whom they had been searching for so long, was standing behind him. The monsters attacked. The party fell into chaos. The Crown Prince felt a little embarrassed. He had originally planned to wait until the Duke appeared before luring the monsters to the party venue. Now the monsters had come directly on their own. Suddenly, he saw them at the corner. He shouted at the crowd that these monsters had been brought by the Duke. Duke Ambrosia appeared and protected everyone. No one listened to him anymore. Even the royal soldiers were trampled under the monster's feet. The Duke walked up to him and stared at him coldly. Sarah suddenly noticed something and looked carefully in confusion. Without hesitation, he thrust his sword forward. The Crown Prince thought he was going to die. His grace killed the monster behind the Crown Prince. In fact, Sarah could temporarily manipulate his magic, but it was rather risky. Still, she believed the Duke would turn danger into safety. After all, he had to protect Claude. Viscount Naivan saw his son. He was unharmed. The mess before everyone left them rather confused. The Crown Prince said the Duke had lured the monsters in, yet the Duke had saved the Crown Prince. Could it be that the Crown Prince had staged the whole thing himself? The Ambrosia Knights were speechless. What nonsense were these people saying? Viscount Naivan stepped forward and took out a recording stone. He said he had just recorded everything that had happened. Everyone was surprised. Was he not one of the second prince's people? Yet he had actually stepped forward to speak. He revealed the Crown Prince's inaction at the scene. He had also recorded the smirk the Crown Prince had shown while looking at the forest before the incident occurred. When the time came, he would present it directly to His Majesty. The Crown Prince was now utterly terrified and had lost all composure. After the party ended, all the nobles present decided to go together and provide testimony before the emperor. Ruth sincerely apologized to Claude. The reason Viscount Naivin helped them was that they had saved Ruth. It was the first time he had ever seen Ruth look at him that way. Of course, his motives had not been entirely pure either. He had brought the recording stone to record the crown prince apologizing to Claude, then show it to the second prince. This incident would make the emperor dissatisfied. He planned to return to his territory and avoid the storm for now, then come back when Ruth came of age. The Duke said he should never have dragged children into adult matters from the very beginning. Whether it was the children or themselves, they were all the same. Viscount Naivin understood. Claude had gone through many things today, but thankfully he had come, and he did not regret it at all. In the distance, Viscount Naivin regretted his own actions. Thankfully, his son was safe. The administrative hall had now fallen into chaos. Some people opposed sending the first prince to the Aidon territory. After all, that place was attacked by monsters several times every year. The central nobles faction of the third prince spoke up. His Majesty had entrusted this matter to the second prince. Was he trying to send his elder brother to his death? Someone said this was his punishment. Only this could calm his Majesty's anger. The central nobles faction of the third prince sent someone else forward as well. Since he had used monsters to do such a terrible thing, he deserved it. The two sides began arguing. The Duke listened to them quarrel without saying anything. Only after they calmed down could the meeting finally begin. His Highness the Second Prince had sent an invitation. The Duke wanted to refuse outright, but Claude had also received an invitation, saying it was to apologize on behalf of the First Prince. The Duke was somewhat speechless. Was the apology only about the party? But it seemed this was the only way. This time, the prince had invited many people close to Claude's age. That way, the young master could make new playmates. He had clearly put some thought into it. The first prince had been exiled to the Aidon territory, which was crawling with monsters. The second prince held the authority to punish members of the imperial family. This showed that the emperor had decided to hand the throne to him. Although things had not fallen into the worst possible situation, it could not be denied that events were developing in an unexpected direction. Claude was actually with that child. Jed said that they had not had time to send the child back. They had already told the people of the estate that he was Claude's friend. That child was the third prince's illegitimate son. Sarah probably did not know. Now, instead of going to see His Majesty, he had an appointment. The two children were playing outside. They were Claude and Elisa. No one had expected them to get along so well. Fortunately, the incident with the monsters had not affected them, and that child's background was not important. What mattered was that they could happily play together. Claude and he should be able to become good friends. As for the rest, that was an adult matter. Just then, a messenger pigeon suddenly arrived. The note said the Duke was on his way. Sarah had completely forgotten the promise they had made to meet once a week whenever he had time. After all, she had been enjoying her time alone with Claude too much. Besides, he should have been very busy right now. Yet he chose this exact moment. He should know Elisa's identity. Sarah was afraid he would suspect her of having ulterior motives. But the Duke's carriage had already arrived at the gate. Asked whether she wanted to go out and greet him, Sarah took a deep breath and agreed. Now, there was only one way, tell the truth. When she saw the Duke, she happily said she had not expected him to keep the appointment, since he must have been busy lately. Faced with Sarah's playful smile, he merely stared at her. Finally, he asked whether there was nothing else she wanted to tell him. Sarah said Claude had been having a lot of fun and needed friends. But the Duke immediately frowned and said he could not play with that child. How could Sarah bring him back without knowing his identity? He even told Sarah to send him back. Of course, she knew the child's identity, but Claude liked Elisa. And for what the children said, Elisa had saved Claude's life this time. Even if Elisa himself did not think much of it, they were no longer merely passing acquaintances. Judging by the situation, these people were intelligence agents of the House of Ambrosia. The Duke intended to erase every trace of Elisa. Sarah asked whether it was simply because Elisa was the third prince's illegitimate son. The two of them needed to talk alone outside. Sarah intended to confess part of the truth to him. At that moment, the Duke felt a severe headache. Sarah noticed that he was unwell and stepped forward to help ease it. She said he had always put Claude first. The Duke said this was dangerous. After all, if the third prince found out, something like yesterday's incident might happen again. But Sarah could feel that the two children were genuinely close. Besides, the third prince could not possibly be as brainless as the first prince. The Duke, however, thought that was hard to say. He did not want Claude to bear any risk beyond the family curse. He actually wanted to keep Claude locked in the house forever until the curse disappeared. But Claude would miss out on so much. A child's growth waits for no one. He needed not only family, but many things family could not fill. Once he missed those things, it would already be too late. The Duke said that was his fate. As long as he possessed that power, he should give up many things. But that was too cruel to Claude. Sarah became very emotional. Was he going to take away the things Claude cherished? The Duke said that once one possessed something, one would lose it. He was a member of the Ambrosia family. Such feelings were a luxury. They should never have existed in the first place. Sarah, perhaps through self-defense magic, splashed water all over him. So he wanted Claude to live like that, alone, forcing himself to endure without anything or anyone precious to him. He had always lived that way, not even cherishing his own life. And now he wanted the next generation to live the same life. Sarah truly could not help being angry. She hoped he would not lose Claude like this, as if he did not care about his own future. Just thinking about it now still frightened her. He could be like her and simply cherish and protect the people and things before his eyes. Only then did he realize that he had been raising Claude the way his own father had raised him. When Elisa saw the Duke, he was so frightened that he burst into tears. Sarah's ears suffered a direct blow. The reason he was so scared was probably that the Duke had been covered in blood at the time. Sarah told him that the power he had now was enough to protect Claude, and she would work hard to lift the curse. The Duke could not help laughing. He felt that if they joined hands, it was as if they were invincible. The adult's fingers touched. Magic flowed between them. His headache eased greatly. In the carriage, Sarah planned to send Elisa back. After all, he had gone out alone, and his family must be worried. They arrived at the previous marketplace. Sarah shook him awake. He whimpered once and went back to sleep. He looked very adorable. Sarah carried him to a shabby house. A maid came out and thought Sarah was a kidnapper carrying her young master. After Sarah explained, her attitude softened somewhat. This woman, whose emotions were written all over her face, was the current empress's full-blooded younger sister, Cressida, the illegitimate daughter of Auckland. In the novel, she was clearly a young woman, but the person before Sarah was obviously older. Could these changes have been caused by Sarah taking Park Hye-yeon's life? Cressida took the child back with an ugly expression and said Elisa only knew how to run around. He cannot even be considerate of adults. Sarah was rather angered by what she heard. He was still so young. Sarah thought it was no wonder he was afraid of his nanny. This nanny did not care about Elisa at all, nor did she intend to protect him. The third prince had asked her to look after the child, but she had failed to fulfill her duty. Sarah intended to invite him over to play again. Claude needed a playmate, and they were not asking much. She told the maid not to worry, but the maid's expression immediately fell. She was clumsy and far too negligent. The third prince was doing his utmost to conceal his illegitimate child, yet he had arranged for a maid like this. Could there be something about him that Sarah still did not know? The maid agreed. At the same time, Sarah had to leave Claude for now. It was a good thing that he had made a friend, but there was something she had to investigate clearly. With a bang, a tree smashed a monster to the ground. 3 people stood before the monster. These little things really had no ability. Oliven was very frightened. This monster looked far too disgusting. He felt a little guilty. After all, he had accidentally set the wrong coordinates. Benjamin was furious. He had been sent here to suffer, and their teacher was not even here. If teacher were here, they would not need a magic circle and could teleport directly. Unfortunately, he was not as skilled as teacher. He could only set up the array before dark. He planned to settle everything in one go. With tremendous destructive power, he blasted open a clearing. He had already paved the way. They had to finish laying the magic circle before they went down the mountain. Ahead was the Aidon territory. Belluna agreed verbally, but in her heart, she wondered whether it was really all right to bring 2 fools like this to teach her. Watching them leave, I'll even cast magical lines pointing in one direction. After returning, Sarah thought that she had to personally meet the third prince. Although she disliked parties, 2 little figures were fighting in her mind. She wondered what she should do. But right now, she had to deal with the problem of her disciples. Long ago, she had heard that her disciples had begun searching for her. It was only a matter of time before they found her. After all, they were so outstanding, even if one could not tell from their appearances. They were all highly capable mages. She did not want to drag them into this, but she had taught them too well. Even after completing their training, they had remained by her side. And now, the people who truly needed her help were these 2. As expected, she still liked being with them. In the Krenbel Empire, the second Prince Ilir sighed in relief when he heard they had accepted the invitation. His elder brother was not doing well in the Aidon territory, but he had always been useless to begin with. If he had shown even the slightest qualification to become emperor, they would not have had a chance. His Majesty had recently refused greetings from all the princes. The second prince could not help laughing. Did His Majesty look very sad? But this time, His Majesty had actually agreed to attend this party. Previously, the Emperor had always refused. Would it change his mind? He glanced at the attendance list. Sarah was actually on it. She had been living in seclusion before, yet now she would attend as the wet nurse of the House of Ambrosia. He suddenly understood why his elder brother had been so obsessed with the House of Ambrosia, even at the risk of letting the Emperor know. He now wanted information on Sarah. At a market near the border, Belluna told Oliven to hurry up and reactivate the magic circle. Who knew that he would simply vomit there? The two of them threw him onto the street and turned to leave, telling him to catch up later. He thought that once he found Teacher, he would definitely complain about them. These impatient people would pass right by Teacher, even if they found her. They were so obsessed with Teacher that it was no wonder she had left without saying goodbye. Though they had been abandoned, finding Teacher was most important now. Judging by the fragments of magic, they had not gone far. He would catch up with them after finishing his business. Now he would begin searching for where Teacher was. He understood Teacher very well. Any major incident that happened here must be related to her. Wherever she appeared, she stirred up bloodshed and chaos. This time, it had to be related to the prince losing his right of succession. The servants around him were all gossiping about their master. How many servants would keep secrets for a master who had fallen from grace? They were his opening. Now, he was going to gather information. Could he get close to them? After all, he was terribly shy around strangers. Outside the ducal residence, things were noisy. This was the first time Sarah had ever heard the ducal residence this loud. What had happened? After the merchants heard that she would attend an official royal banquet, they rushed to prepare many outfits. They were all made by famous designers. First was the outfit carefully prepared by Madame Devilern, and this one was by Must. It was made from silk like the night sky. Which one did young Master Claude prefer? Whichever one he chose, they were all outstanding. It seemed that through the events of this period, everyone had come to understand young Master Claude's position in the House of Ambrosia. After all, their young master had pulled down the Empire's first prince at only 7 years old. It was indeed impressive. Sarah strongly recommended this one. It made him look like a little puppy. Some people thought Madame Devilern's outfit was better. Others agreed with Must's outfit. Everyone happily argued. At that moment, Claude came over and said he was sleepy. Sarah carried him to the bed. He seemed to have completely let down his guard. Now, he not only came running to find her first, but also had to be hugged before bed before he could fall asleep. Come to think of it, after that incident, the Duke no longer feared getting close to Claude. He would eat breakfast with them according to their agreement. Before going out, he would also gently stroke Claude's head. Not long ago, the Duke had told her that he had resolved to trust the great mage by his side. Thinking about it made her very happy. Issen's trust and affection toward her that day were still fresh in her memory. He really was very adorable. She almost could not bear for him to grow up. But Tai Lin had left. Did she not miss young Master Claude? Sarah had long since given up investigating Tialin's situation because she had learned that in a faraway foreign land, Tai Lin had given birth to Claude's younger sister, Chloe. After Tai Lin and her husband had a beautiful daughter, they must have lived happily together, burying Claude's existence deep in their hearts. Therefore, from now on, Sarah only needed to care about Claude. But sooner or later, she would have to tell Claude these truths. Then for now, she would let him see only the good side of the world. That way, when Claude learned the truth in the future, he would not be hurt too deeply. When she went out, Kai suddenly came over, grabbed her hand, and told her to come with him. It turned out to be a gift from the Duke. It looked beautiful. It had been custom-made. He hoped she would be sure to wear this gown when attending the banquet. But this would be her first time stepping back into society in 6 years. Sarah had originally wanted to keep a low profile, but the Duke had left her a message. Since she had decided to become a member of the family, she had to bear the attention that came with it. This was a gown the Duke had chosen personally. Although she had witnessed that scene with her own eyes, it had still felt like a dream at the time. Sarah used magic and quickly changed into the outfit. The maid's eyes nearly went blind from the sight. Just as Sarah felt they were exaggerating, the Duke arrived. It was a strange feeling, different from her usual running around. She now felt as though she had reclaimed a life that belonged to her. Seeing him silent, Sarah asked how she looked. His face was slightly red, and with a hesitant expression, he said she looked beautiful. He then said that matter had already been resolved. He had leaked a little information, so he also knew that their encounter with Alicia truly had been just a chance meeting. And now he had come to ask for her opinion. He asked whether Sarah would be willing to attend this banquet with him and dance the first dance as his partner. Sarah accepted his invitation despite the misunderstanding. The stone in his heart finally fell. Knowing that she had not danced in a long time, he suggested they practice now. Sarah turned clumsily, but she danced well. At least his shoes would not be injured. Sarah was somewhat flustered and had just wanted to say to wait, but he pulled her in front of him. Smiling, he told her to be careful. Sarah was very embarrassed and retreated to the side. He was actually teasing her now. Still, she was rather happy because the Duke smiled more often than before. He himself had not realized that smiling was a good thing. Every time they ate breakfast together, Claude would show him a livelier expression than the day before. Many heartwarming changes had appeared in the house of Ambrosia. Sarah had changed everything little by little. All of this was change brought by her. The Duke said that she had to take responsibility for it. The tavern was noisy. Oliven raised his glass and happily said that today he would buy everyone a drink again. The surroundings were filled with cheers and laughter. He made up an identity, saying that he did not want to inherit the merchant guild, so he had run away from home. Now he wanted to sell something. It was a treasured item. He had heard that this bead could summon a being that would help people fulfill their wishes. He claimed he had once worked under a great person. As long as something looked gorgeous and rare, nobles would fight desperately over it. He wanted to sell this treasure to a noble for a high price. Meanwhile, the first prince was throwing a tantrum in his chambers. They had no way to deal with him. Were they really going to let the first prince keep making such unreasonable scenes? His father, however, believed that serving one's master was the natural duty of a subject and told him not to say more. He had once greatly admired his father's loyalty to the empire, but now he could not stand by and watch his family choose the wrong side. He knocked and entered. The one being beaten was the first prince's last attendant. If even he fell ill, then afterward, members of their Aidon family would have to personally serve the first prince. He stepped forward and said the servants had found a treasure. It was said that it could summon a being capable of helping people fulfill their wishes. The first prince stared greedily at the bead, even fantasizing about going back and using it to buy himself a little more time to bind his father. Baul withdrew, saying it would only respond to those with grand ambitions. Suddenly, the bead erupted with powerful magic. A magic circle quickly formed. What the hell was this? Someone actually appeared before him. He said he had finally found it. The first prince's body still carried the power that his master had researched. He wanted to ask one thing. Had he been attacked by a force of curse? Who was the owner of that power? Meanwhile, on Sarah's side, she was wearing a gown and preparing to attend the banquet. Claude could not help praising her, saying she was dreamily beautiful. Young Master Claude was very handsome today as well. The Duke watched from a distance and cleared his throat, trying to draw their attention. The two only turned their heads to glance at him, then continued chatting. Hearing the two discuss what they should do if something like last time happened again, the Duke came over, stroked Claude's head, and said he hoped Claude would tell him first. Claude happily agreed. Then they set off for the Imperial Palace. In the Stenia Hall of the Krimble Imperial Palace, everyone was talking. They had heard that the first prince, who had been sent to the Aitone territory, had gone mad. It seemed they finally had a chance to see the person Viscount Naivin often talked about. Suddenly, a commotion spread through the venue. With an announcement, Sarah and the others arrived at the banquet. This royal banquet, hosted by the second Prince Iliur, appeared on the surface to be a celebration blessing the first prince's successful return from studying abroad. But in truth, it was meant to tell everyone that the power the emperor had openly favored for years had already collapsed. The Duke of House Ambrosia and his young master attended the banquet. Sarah, the social flower who had disappeared after inheriting the position of young countess, also attended as the young master's wet nurse. The banquet grew livelier amid cries of surprise. However, there was no place here for a 7-year-old child. His father was surrounded by a group of adults. The children close to his age were all foolishly naive. The slightly older children were not willing to approach him either. As for his wet nurse, was that person flirting with her? Claude instantly transformed into a sharp-eyed observer, studying the man's appearance and his interaction with Sarah. It seemed the two had been chatting for a long time. That gentleman appeared to mistakenly believe that young Countess Sarah was truly enjoying talking with him, not realizing that her smile was only out of politeness. He was truly a toad lusting after swan meat. The two exchanged a look. They silently complained non-stop, but had no money to rescue her. Then someone said Claude had fallen. Hearing this, Sarah hurried over. The two ran extremely fast. Claude really had collapsed on the ground. Many people gathered around. The Duke came over to check what had happened. At this moment, someone felt very guilty. Claude had pretended to fall. They said he had eaten something bad. He lay in Sarah's arms crying. The surroundings were noisy. They told him to leave the venue first and take care of him. What exactly had happened? The two disciples were searching for their master, but had no clues. All even appeared behind them and cheerfully asked whether they had found any clues, since they had left him behind and gone ahead. Their expressions were very ugly. He had come. He took out the items in his hand and said that these magic stones contained the power Master had been obsessed with. Belluna saw that he had touched Master's laboratory, but the magic stones contained life-stealing power, so she would confiscate them. However, he smiled and said he'd already used them. Belluna angrily grabbed him by the neck. To Master, this power was nothing worth mentioning. She had often said it only made her cough up a little blood. How could they find Master without paying some price? Their bond with Master had already been severed back at the Magic Tower. Master had completely let go of their hand because she wanted them to live their own lives. They had clearly not been prepared for anything, yet Master had abandoned them and left. It was truly too much. These tools could help them identify Master. As long as they scattered them nearby, Master definitely would not ignore them. Over the past few days, he had first made contact with the first prince in the Aidon territory and learned the situation. From the first prince, he had learned something. In the room, looking at the crying Claude, Sarah asked him what had happened. In the end, what he asked was whether his wet nurse was going to get married. They said that as long as someone married her, he could inherit her title and property. His wet nurse was so beautiful, and at night too. Before he could finish, Sarah covered his mouth. The Duke held his hand and said he would deal with it. Claude was very dejected. Thinking carefully, he had never felt it strange for his wet nurse to stay by his side. He had taken it for granted that she would stay with him forever. That was until he heard others discussing that his wet nurse might marry and no longer remain at the ducal residence. And now Sarah thought he was far too adorable. How could she ever abandon him? A knight said to the Duke. The second prince was outside requesting an audience. He walked in and said, "So this was the resting room exclusive to the House of Ambrosia, where not even the emperor could enter." This was the second prince. He had come to check on Claude's condition. Claude looked at the person before him and felt that he resembled that frightening prince. But the feeling he gave off was entirely different. The second prince had only just praised Sarah's beauty when Claude burst into tears. He watched the second prince warily from behind Sarah and stuck out his tongue at him. The second prince stood frozen in shock. His son was rather clever. He sighed with some emotion and said that he had never expected such a talented person to willingly serve another as young Master Claude's wet nurse. Calmly, someone reminded him that the emperor should arrive soon. Was he going to remain absent from the venue? As expected, the House of Ambrosia always stood at the peak of power, and even the imperial family was no exception. Since he had confirmed that young Master Ambrosia was fine, he would leave first. He would personally inform His Majesty of this matter. He would learn about Sarah appropriately under the watchful eyes of the House of Ambrosia, thereby dispelling his doubts about her. He knew how to stop at the right point, and he understood the principle of mutual benefit. Another day, he would visit personally to apologize for offending Claude. For the second prince, this was an unexpected gain. Looking at the crying Claude, Sarah asked whether he understood a mage's oath. Mages used oaths to make promises that had to be kept. If they failed to keep the promise, the mage would lose their power. They might even pay with their life. Now she had already made an oath with him. Until he obtained happiness, she would never abandon him. So he no longer needed to live in fear, because she would stay with him until he found happiness. In his memory, he had never fully possessed anything, let alone the people he treasured. That was why he was so afraid of losing her. After all, she was so special to him. But why was she doing this? She was his mother's friend, while he was the culprit who had caused his mother's death. Sarah wanted very much to confess the truth to him, but now was not the time. He absolutely deserved to be loved. Sometimes, things were the adult's fault. She was very afraid of how Claude would react if he knew that all of this had been caused by her. If there was one thing that would never change, it was that she needed to confess everything, ask him to forgive her, and then break the oath she had made with her disciples. The mistake she had committed was extremely grave. Perhaps he would hate her for the rest of his life. Claude heard this and said he would forgive her, no matter what she had done, because he liked his wet nurse the most. At that moment, Sarah was deeply moved. Her eyes could not help reddening. At the banquet, His Majesty the Emperor soon arrived. He had even brought the third prince. They heard that His Highness the Third Prince had gone to carry out His Majesty's secret order this time. Did that not mean His Majesty did not intend to fully support the second prince? His Highness the Second Prince had gone alone to meet Duke Ambrosia. But seeing that the third prince did not seem to care much, The emperor did not understand his intentions. The second prince had brought down his own brother, so he must have wanted to enjoy this moment of victory. The third prince went to get his majesty a drink and discovered that young Master Ambrosia was also not in the venue. He remembered what Elisa had once said. He wanted to play with Claude. That was the first time his son had defied him. Because Elisa had secretly gone to see young Master Claude on his own, he had threatened him that he would never be allowed to go out again. Who would have thought he would react that way? Just then, someone bumped into his shoulder. The person apologized awkwardly. Which family was this person from? A gem fell to the floor, and the person disappeared. Seal the venue immediately. A suspicious person had entered. When the Duke returned, he saw that both their eyes were swollen, as if they had been arguing. But now was not the time to tease them. He had heard that a suspicious person had infiltrated the venue. He would first have Claude stay here. Looking at Claude, he told him not to leave Sarah's side. He would be back soon. They should not be in danger inside the Imperial Palace. But Sarah felt very strange. This had not happened in the novel. She had a bad feeling, and that person's clothing did not look like someone attending the banquet. She heard that the suspicious person was a green-haired man wearing a cloak. Sarah was shocked when she heard this. Something had fallen from his arms when he left. It was a glowing stone. She could be certain that the suspicious person was a leave-in. Claude was uneasy. Why was his wet nurse making that expression? Did she want to go over there? Had she not said it was dangerous? But that was a mistake she had made. She had to go correct it. It was someone she knew. When she was at the Magic Tower, she had taught him personally. It was probably because she had left the Magic Tower without a word that he was angry. She had to go clean up the mess. She instructed the knights not to let Claude approach that stone. The Duke might use that power. From what she saw today, the paper charm would not hold out much longer either. No matter what happened, she had to go stop it. Sarah appeared at the banquet. The banquet was still proceeding as usual. It seemed they had not informed the nobles that someone had infiltrated the imperial palace. The emperor greeted her. He should have already heard about it. In the end, they had concluded that it was a magic stone. She should still go take a look. Seeing Sarah appear, he anxiously walked over. Should she not be with Claude? But the one in the greatest danger now was him. As he and Claude grew closer, the magic consumed to suppress that power of Will also increased. She needed to make a new tool. The Duke did not understand her at all. She had never seen him look so obedient before. As long as she infused her own power, the power of their family would be like something that had eaten and drunk its fill, falling asleep. She even began to suspect whether it had obtained what it wanted. A flicker came from the distance. The magic stone had just flashed once. Suddenly, it erupted with a huge light. Sarah hurriedly tried to run over and stop it. It was clearly about to be too late. A cracking sound rang through space.